I've been living in Lewiston with my wife and kids for the past 20 years. We initially moved here not long after getting married. We met in New York at first and were planning on settling over there. But suddenly her dad went through a really dangerous stroke, and well, it made more sense to be closer to them, in case anything might happen. It was the right decision. Her dad passed away 2 years later, unfortunately, but we did have a chance of spending a lot of time by his side. Also, by that point, I'd ended up in a really good job in a local bank, so it all seemed like it was pointing to us just building our life here. Then the kids came, life took another shape, and we really ended up making Lewiston our home. I was happy, and in hindsight pretty glad that my children got the chance to grow up in a more suburban, safer, less chaotic environment, far away from the dangers and rush of New York. I never imagined the sort of dangers we could run into by being here. As I try to gather my thoughts at the moment, try to figure out how to best protect my family, I wonder if this is the sort of danger you can even attempt to escape from. I guess I should be clearer. Something's stalking us. I don't want to say someone, because it can't possibly be human, but at the same time I don't know if something is the right term for it. It's far too intelligent for a simple creature. It all began around a week ago, on a normal Friday night. We were all on our way back home after my son's soccer game. It wasn't very late. It must have been around 9 p.m. We were just pulling up into our driveway, still excitedly talking about his team's victory, when I saw something. Our neighborhood is located just next to a small stretch of forest, located right behind our house. As I looked through the rearview mirror when parking, I saw it. It must have been just a split second, but I saw something, lanky, thin and white, scurrying silently in the forest. I did a double take to get a better look, but by then it was gone, and there were just trees and darkness. Intrigued, I stopped to stare for a while, hoping to give whatever it was another look, but it made no further appearances. I already felt it though. This small, slight sinking feeling in my gut. The kids got out of the car and went straight inside, still excitedly talking about the game, but my wife could tell. She caught my gaze, still fixed on the forest, and asked me what was wrong. I didn't know how to answer that. It'd probably been just an animal walking by. I told her so, and got out of the car. No reason to linger onto it. In fact, by the time I'd gone inside, I had already put the whole thing out of my mind. The rest of the evening went on as usual. We ordered pizza to celebrate, and then we all decided to watch a movie, to which both the kids promptly fell asleep to. My wife, who'd had a really long shift at work, was also clearly doing an inhuman effort to keep herself awake, so I ended up stopping the movie and telling her I'd carry the kids to bed by myself, so she could go straight to rest. She thanked me and promptly did so, while I carried the children to bed one by one. The house was deadly quiet. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Everyone was already in bed after all, but for some reason, that night the silence really got to me. My steps seemed to resonate on the floor, and the hallways felt cavernous. Little by little, this dread was starting to build up inside me, and I wasn't sure why. As I tucked my daughter in bed, something caught my eye again. Her window, right next to her bed, had a perfect view of our backyard, which ended on the aforementioned stretch of forest. I looked outside and saw it, a big, spindly, vaguely humanoid-shaped figure, standing on all fours in the middle of our backyard, its limbs twisted in all sorts of awkward angles. I froze, completely stunned, unable to process what I was seeing. The thing somehow knew I'd seen it. It slowly raised its head, showing two deep, bright white eyes in the middle of its otherwise featureless face, and crawled away at an inhuman speed. The gut feeling came back again, this time with full force. Swallowing my fear, I bolted out of my daughter's room, and straight back into mine. I began looking through my drawer until I found what I needed, my small revolver pistol. I was trying not to wake my wife, but it was pointless. She's too much of a light sleeper. She stared at me, eyes wide with worry, as she saw me loading the revolver, and asked me what was wrong. I wasn't sure what to tell her, so I just told her I'd seen something strange roaming around the house and just wanted to make sure we were safe. That didn't seem to calm her down at all. She just told me she'd go stand in the hallway and yell if needed. I really didn't want to put her in any danger, but I knew I wasn't gonna be able to change her mind either. I just nodded and headed downstairs, turning all the lights on as I made my way down. The ground floor was empty. I looked around everywhere, but there was no sign of it. I slowly began approaching the backyard, gun loaded, ready to shoot at a moment's notice. It wasn't there either, just these huge tracks it had left on the grass. Unsure of what to do, I began walking back slowly until I suddenly heard it. This screeching, shrilling noise that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, drilling deep inside my head. It killed every single thought capacity. My mind was emptied and filled with painful noise. In a second, it was over, and suddenly I knew the creature's name, the Rake. It hadn't told me. Somehow, though, it was now in my mind. I didn't know where the sounds had come from. I went out to the backyard, trying to catch him lurking around, but it was useless. It had vanished. Suddenly, I realized how vulnerable I'd left my family upstairs. I rushed back up in a panic and found my wife frozen with fear, looking out through the hallway's window. I tried to ask her where it was, ready to chase it and hunt it down, but she told me it was already gone. I rushed to check my children's rooms, and they were both awake, confused by all the noise, but unharmed. I breathed a sigh of relief. It didn't last long, however. As soon as I got back to my wife, she looked at me with the deepest despair in her eyes and told me the Rake will come back. It had said so itself. We have been staying in Florida with my brother for about 3 months now. I was lucky. My job managed to accommodate me going completely remote, and my wife could find another job in no time. We changed the kids' schools and are trying to sell our house while we find a new home here. We figured that way we'd be safe. Stay away, try to disappear, make it lose our trace. It seemed to work at first. Even though we were still on edge, it really did seem like it wouldn't find us over here. We didn't know the huge mistake we were making. My wife began having these disturbing dreams about the Rake. Not a week before I'm writing this, she'd dream it would be sitting by the foot of her bed, waiting, or stand in the corner of the room watching. I attributed it all to our minds still being on edge. 2 nights ago, though, we had to take my sister-in-law to the ICU. She'd suffered a terrible attack that had left her deep lacerations all over her body while out on her backyard. She'd lost a lot of blood, but my wife had found her on time, and they managed to save her life. We all thought it'd been a wild animal attack, but when she recovered consciousness, she told us about this lanky, pale white creature with glowing eyes, crawling around her backyard. It's found us somehow, and I've put my brother and his wife's lives at risk. I don't know what else to do. I don't know if we can escape him. And worst of all, I don't know who he's coming for next. I'd always been a wilderness enthusiast. Be it any weather, any biome, any time of the day, I was always up for a trek in nature and some animal sightseeing. I loved getting to see them in their natural habitats, coexisting among each other. I found it very relaxing, I dare say. Now I won't set foot outside my house. I don't know what we ran into this time, but it wasn't an animal nor a human, and now it's after me. I haven't been able to get it to lose my track, and I don't know what to do anymore. I think it's in my house. It all started about a month ago. I'd taken some time off of work and had just returned from my trip to Cancun. I still had a couple of days till I had to go back to the office, and I'd already spent enough time inside the house after my trip. I was dying to go out for some contact with nature. Plus, I really had to enjoy the warm weather while it still lasted. Therefore, I set up hike through one of my favorite trails here in Greenwich, the one through the Babcock Preserve. It's a very relaxed, easy trail, which was perfect since I wasn't in the mood for something very challenging. Plus, I really wanted to bring a friend along whom I hadn't seen in a while already and catch up a bit as we walked. Everything worked out just fine, and the very next day we were making our way through the lovely trail, just catching up on our lives as we trekked and enjoyed the sights and smells a forest has to offer. When we were about halfway on the path, I stopped and revealed him something. Long ago, I discovered a very beautiful part of the forest you can reach if you just go a little off trail in a certain spot. Every time I do this trek, I'd go visit my secret spot. It was perfect for disconnecting. People and pets weren't anywhere to be seen, and you could just lie down and feel the true life of the forest. This time, though, I decided I'd share my secret spot with him. It was a great time. He was just as much of nature enthusiast as me, so we both really enjoyed just laying down on the grass and soil and being quiet for a while, letting the forest speak to us. The sun started setting. We must have been there for at least an hour already when we heard it. This high-pitched, shrilling noise, like nails being dragged across a chalkboard. Startled, we looked around us, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Then the strangest thing happened. A name took shape in my mind. I guess I'd somehow got it out from the noises, but it was there, and I almost blurted it out loud. My friend looked at me, and I knew he'd just experienced the same thing. He said it first, the rake. I just nodded. We looked at each other, and knew something was deeply wrong. I began looking frantically around, trying to find the source of the noise. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just forest, birds, and the occasional squirrel. None of those things could have made it. Normally, a noise I'd never heard before means I get to see an animal I'd never seen before, and I never let those opportunities pass me by. Not this time. This noise was different. It meant danger. We both knew it somehow, so without saying anything, we began walking straight back towards the path where we come from. As we walked, the name was still in my mind. The rake. What did it mean? Where had I gotten it from? And how did my friend know about it too in the exact same moment? I instinctively began walking faster, and my friend followed my pace. I felt eyes everywhere. Nature had never felt so hostile. Suddenly, I saw it. Right in front of us, deep into the shadows of the forest, something shone. I stopped and took a closer look. Two bright specks of light were floating in between the trees. With the imminent sunset, the place had gotten very dark, very fast, and I had no choice but to squint, trying to make out what they were. Suddenly, I began running, dragging my friend right behind me. They weren't specks of light. They were eyes. Deep, emotionless bright eyes on a lanky, thin, humanoid body. I didn't know if it was chasing us. I was just focusing away on leaving the thing as far behind us as possible. I ran fueled by pure terror, not knowing where I was going, nor thinking how we'd find our way to the path again. My only thought was fleeing. Eventually, I had to stop, exhausted, and catch my breath for a while. My friend was in the same condition. I asked if he'd seen it, and he said he'd just seen the little lights between the trees. I tried to describe the creature to him, but even I wasn't 100% sure if what I'd seen was right. My mind was having a hard time believing it. He understood anyways. He'd felt my terror. He'd heard the noise. It was getting darker by the minute, and we both had no idea where we were. I knew the path couldn't be very far, as we'd been pretty close to reaching it before we ran away, and I believed I still had a general idea of where to go. So off we were, deeply on edge and utterly terrified of what lurked in the forest, but determined to make it out of there as soon as possible. Every movement made me jump, and every time I'd see something scurrying beside me, my gut would drop to my knees. My friend was the same, so that just led to a very slow, stunted progress on our way back to the path. The forest was pitch black by now. I cursed myself, knowing we should just come earlier, but kept on going, trusting my sense of direction. It was no use. We'd been walking for 30 minutes by now, and there were no signs of the path. I wasn't sure we were going in the right direction anymore, or if we were just getting ourselves more lost. My friend had enough. He broke down and sobbed, utterly distraught. I tried to calm him down, but it was no use. I was just as scared and desperate. As I sat down in defeat, I heard it, rustling among the leaves, 4 limbs, moving at a rapid pace towards us. I stooped up and bolted. The last thing I saw was my friend sitting there, frozen in fear, as the rake stood before him, the razor claws in his fingers poised for attacking. I heard a slashing sound and ran faster without looking back. I was lucky. I somehow ended up picking the right direction to run, and was back to the normal trekking path, now practically empty. I didn't stop running until I made it to my car, which I started immediately and drove back at an insane speed. I didn't go straight back home. I took side streets, did a few rounds around certain areas with some dense traffic, and did some drastic U-turns here and there. I couldn't see anyone or anything following me, but I wanted to make sure I'd be hard to keep track of. It somehow found us in the forest. Can't be careful enough. Eventually, I made it home, and was unable to sleep for a single second. I could just stare out my window. I know my friend is dead, and the guilt hangs over me every second of the day. I left him behind. I didn't even try to save him. But I just couldn't help it. My body reacted and I couldn't stop myself from running. Thinking that doesn't help at all, though. As I mentioned before, it's been a month already, and I haven't told anyone about it. For some reason, the best way to cope has been to try and lead a normal life. I go to work every day, I make myself dinner, and I try to keep my mind busy. Inside, though, I know I'm a mess, and I avoid talking to anyone for very long, in fear I might just crumble spontaneously. His family will begin asking about him soon. I still don't know what I'll tell them. I know the rake is still out there. Maybe I'm going crazy, but I swear I've seen him. Just a little glimpse outside my house, right out of the corner of my eye. A long, pale limb. 2 tiny specks of light. A big head with no features besides those big white eyes. I think he watches me sleep. I might be making it all up, but I just feel it. He'll come for me eventually. I always thought they were all dreams. I'm sure you've heard of sleep paralysis. In case you haven't, though, here's a quick overview. Sleep paralysis is when, for some reason, a part of your mind wakes up, but most of it is still asleep. It usually happens right when you're falling asleep or when you're about to wake up. This means that since a little bit of yourself is awake, you actually get to see the place that surrounds you, say, your room or whatever. However, since you aren't completely awake, your mind makes up these strange, terrifying hallucinations, and you see someone staring at you, or sitting on top of you or something, suffocating you. The thing is, since your body isn't awake, you can't move. That's why it's called paralysis. It's really something, and even though it doesn't last very long, it can become very panic-inducing. You always end up waking up eventually, though, finding out it was just a dream. I've suffered from sleep paralysis since I was 12. I would often wake up in a screaming fit in the middle of the night and make my parents rush to my room in a panic, just to find me scared at nothing. At some point it began to happen really frequently, and I was having trouble staying awake as my sleep quality got worse every day. My parents took me to several different sleep clinics, and I went through many different treatments, but none really seemed to work. The thing is, there's no actual known cause to sleep paralysis. It can just happen without an exact reason to blame it for. Therefore, my parents decided to stop relying on modern medicine and go through alternative methods. I went through priests, shamans, and all sorts of holy men of many different religions, as well as many alternative medicine methods, but still, nothing seemed to work. The paralysis was happening almost every night by then. I still remember it, clear as day. This tall, lanky humanoid thing, with impossibly large limbs and pale white skin, as well as glowing white eyes, would stand on all fours in a corner of my room, staring at me. Then it would crawl slowly toward my bed, with its spider-like movements, and sit at the foot of my bed, looking at me with his burrowing, blinding stare, and no other distinguishable features on its face. That was it. Almost every night. The same events, the same creature, everything. I knew it was just a dream disorder. I knew the creature wasn't real, and it was just my mind making up stupid hallucinations, but that didn't help at all. The visions still terrified me just the same every single day. And the creature just seemed so real. What shook me the most, though, were probably his eyes. Despite being huge, glowing pits, I could see intelligence in them. I could see reasoning. But worst of all, I could see pure, unadulterated malice and intentions to harm. I don't know how a stare could convey that, but I knew it. I described it to my parents, and it just made them more worried. I ended up even going through some psychiatrists who were unable to detect any abnormalities or signs of mental illness beyond stress and lack of sleep. I'm pretty sure my parents were convinced some evil spirit had possessed me by then, and I was slowly coming to the same conclusion. Well, for some reason, one day they just simply stopped happening. It'd been almost a year of almost nightly encounters, and then nothing. I could sleep soundly again the whole night through. My parents were absolutely relieved, as was I. We didn't know what worked, but something did, and I was free. Well, so I thought. They ended up returning when I was about 14. The first time it happened again, I was livid. I decided to not wake up my parents. I didn't want to worry them again, but I was freaked out. The sole thought of going through all that all over again, not being able to sleep properly almost every night, I just felt like throwing up. This time the hallucination had been different though. It'd been the same creature, but this time I saw it entering my room, opening the door while on two legs, standing up like a person, and then going back to its disturbing crawling movements, slowly creeping towards me. I woke up properly before it reached me though. I didn't mention it to anyone. The night after it, I made sure to go to bed early, take a warm shower, change my sheets, not eat or drink anything 2 hours before going to sleep, avoid blue lights, everything that is supposed to help you have a better night's sleep. It worked. The night was completely uneventful. I thought I'd cured myself. At 16, they came back. Same deal. It was just one random, unprompted night when I was staying over at a friend's house. I was sleeping on the couch of his room, and I saw the window open. The creature came inside, ripping one of the curtains with its claws, and crawled towards me, until he was just right next to my head. Then he spoke. He'd never spoken before, but this time he did. Well, it didn't speak per se. He made these shrilling, screeching noises when opening a previously inexistent mouth, and I somehow understood what he said. His name was the Rake. I woke up at that moment and cursed silently, deeply frustrated that they were back again. As I stood up to drink some water and try to calm myself before attempting to sleep again, I saw something that made stop in my tracks. The window was open. I was pretty sure it hadn't been open when we'd gone to sleep, but now it was. I shrugged it off, figuring either my friend had opened it or we'd left it open and I was misremembering. I went to close it when I noticed something else, something far more disturbing. One of the curtains had been ripped. Unmistakable claw marks were clearly left in the fabric. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no way. I breathed in deeply, trying to calm my increasingly faster heartbeat. It must have been my friend's cat. He had a cat, and the cat must have ripped the curtains, and I must have seen them at some point, and my sleeping brain incorporated them into my sleep paralysis hallucinations. Yeah, that was it. I settled for that explanation. I stopped having paralysis for a long time afterwards, Luckily, it stopped again after just that one night. As I grew up, and they didn't come back, I began attributing them to some disorder in my developing mind. I still remembered them very clearly, and they still gave me the chills, but it was just that, a creepy anecdote of my past. I was wrong, though. They are back. The rake is back. I'm 28 years old now. It's been 5 years since I moved away from parents' place after getting a job in Pennsylvania. Last night, the rake was back in my dreams. This time, however, something else happened. Something that's making me question if they were ever dreams at all. I went to bed straight after doing some pretty brutal overtime, completely exhausted. In the middle of the night, I heard scratching noises against my tiled floor. I woke and saw my bedroom empty. They were coming from the corridor. I knew the signs of sleep paralysis. I knew the feeling in my stomach. The noises suddenly stopped and were followed by my dog's most shrilling howl. He sounded completely terrified. Right after it, he began barking lowly, aggressively, mixed in with some whimpering, slashing, followed by a yelp, and then more and more wet, squelching slashing. Someone was hurting my dog. I wasn't having it. I tried to move my body to go and stop it, and it worked. I was standing next to my bed. I stood there, stunned for a second. What did this mean? If I could get up, this was no sleep paralysis. Was this just a dream then? I decided to leave the questions for later and opened the door to my corridor. There, in the darkness, I could see glowing white eyes. I knew who'd come for a visit. I turned on the lights, and there was the rake, covered in my poor dog's blood and gore. I felt my stomach drop. Tense with fear, I managed to muster a few words as he stared at me, asking him what he wanted. He just looked at me. After a few seconds, he emitted those same shrilling noises as all those years ago. His words materialized in my mind. Desolation. Next thing I know, I was waking up on the floor. I was bewildered. How had I ended up there? Had I sleepwalked? The strong smell of blood hit me straight in the face. I got up and was met with the horrid realization. My dog laid on the other end of the corridor, completely torn to pieces by razor-sharp claws. I couldn't process it. It'd all been a dream. It hadn't been paralysis, sure, but that doesn't mean. I couldn't hold it anymore, and I began sobbing next to what was left of my buddy. It's been a few days since then, and I'm hoping writing it all down will help me process it a bit. What does it all mean? Were any of the encounters ever dreams? Was I ever truly paralyzed? Now that I know the rake is real, I'm afraid of what might happen next. I don't ever want to find out what he meant by what he said. It seems, though, that soon I'll have no other choice. I'll have to be prepared.